Hello, everyone, and welcome to Minimalist Gourmet, where today I'll be teaching you how to make a delicious zucchini lasagna. This dish is perfect for everyone, including those on a low carb or gluten free diet. The best part is I'm going to take you step by step and show you how to make this 100% from scratch. Homemade has never tasted better, so let's get started. The first thing we need to do is prep our zucchini. This is pretty simple. We're simply going to cut off the tip here, flip it over, and then take a little bit off the bottom. It's also a good idea to check the size of the zucchini against the baking dish you're going to be using. If it's too large, you want to trim it to size, but you want to make sure that it fits in here nicely without any overlap. This looks perfect. To make the zucchini into strips, you have a few options. You can use something like a vegetable peeler and just run it down the length, but these are going to be fairly thin and not my ideal choice. You could look to your grater if you have a long slot cutter just like this, but again, the strips will be very thin and not ideal. The perfect tool for this job would be a mandolin. However, I don't have one of those, and I'm not going to assume that you do either. Everyone has a knife though, so that's what I'm going to go ahead and use. This will work perfect, but use the tool that you have on hand. This first cut is going to be just on the edge to make this side flat. I'm not going to be using this in lasagna, but we do want to start with a flat surface. My target thickness is about a 1/4 inch thick slices. You can go a little thinner if you want than this, but try not to go much thicker just to make sure everything gets cooked well. Work your way through the zucchini until you get to the very end. On this last piece here, I'm going to sandwich everything together, and just like I did on this first edge, I'm going to take just the very edge off to make a nice flat surface so that we can build upon it later. I like my pieces to look a little bit like this, not too thick, not too thin. This should work fantastic. If you happen to cut a piece of zucchini a little off thickness here like I did, where it's thin at one side and thicker on the other side, that's super easy to correct. Just go ahead and put it down on your cutting board and run your knife parallel to the cutting board, thinning it out and making sure that the entire thickness is even. With all of your zucchini sliced up, you want to place it onto some paper towels and make sure it's in one nice even layer with no overlap. Next, we'll be applying salt to both surfaces of the zucchini slices and allowing it to sit. This is actually going to draw the moisture out of the zucchini and onto the surface so we can towel it off. This is a very important step because zucchinis are around 95% water. If we don't extract some of their moisture before we bake it, in the end, we're going to have a big, soupy mess on our hands, which really is not very good for anyone. Simply apply a fairly generous amount of salt all over the surface of each piece of zucchini. Then flip it over and repeat with the salt on the second surface. You're going to allow them to sit here on these paper towels for about 20 to 30 minutes to allow the salt time to work its magic and extract some of that moisture. You can see I do this step first, that way the salt can work its magic while I'm prepping up the rest of the dish. Next, we're going to make our tomato sauce, and I'm going to show you how to use fresh tomatoes for this. Don't worry, if you want to use canned, we'll talk about that later as well. The first thing we need to do is blanch the tomatoes in a little bit of boiling water, then put them into an ice bath. This is going to allow us to peel them very easy. On the bottom of each tomato, make a small cut in the shape of an X, and it really doesn't have to be very deep at all. You just want some place for the skin to peel so we can remove it easier later. We're going to place all of our tomatoes into a bit of boiling water for about 30 to 60 seconds max. This is called blanching. We are not trying to cook the tomatoes at this point. We simply want to blanch them in the boiling water so it removes the skin from the tomato. Once your tomato skins start to separate from the body like this, you know they're ready to pull. You're going to place them into an ice water bath, thus halting the cooking process and cooling them down enough to allow you to handle them. Let them sit in the ice water bath for about 60 seconds, then you can go ahead and peel them. Peeling the tomatoes couldn't be easier. All you need to do is grab right where you score the tomato and peel back the skin. It should come right off because we blanched them. I like to peel them back just like this and then pinch it down at the base and pull it off in one big piece. Now, slice off just the tip here to remove the cap and roughly chop it. It absolutely doesn't need to be even or pretty looking. I'm going to use my hand to break these down a little bit because we don't want it to be quite so chunky. If you don't like the texture or feeling of doing this with your hands, that's not a problem. Go ahead and use a spoon or a potato masher directly in the pot. It'll work just as well. Of course, it wouldn't be a tomato sauce if we didn't have onions, and I'm using half of a large white onion here that I'm going to dice up. You can use white or yellow onions if you'd like. I would avoid red onions though. Where there's onions, there's garlic, and we need about 5 cloves, which we're going to chop up. You can mince this very fine, but I'm kind of a rustic man myself, and I love my garlic, so I'm going to leave it a little bit larger. In a large pot over medium-high heat, I'm going to place a couple of tablespoons of olive oil and allow it to come up to temperature. I'll be cooking about a pound of ground pork and about a half a pound of ground beef. I really like the flavor profile of the two meats together, but you can use what you like. You can go with all ground beef, all ground pork, or if you're looking for a lower calorie option, something like ground chicken or ground turkey work great. If you're vegetarian, that's not a problem. Just go ahead and omit the meat. You're going to begin your tomato sauce with sauteing the onions. Season this up with a bit of salt as well as some ground black pepper. Continue to cook this until all your meat is completely browned. If you're enjoying this video, maybe consider giving this a like, comment, or even subscribing. I'd love to see you back here on the channel in the future. Definitely check out the description below. I also include a recipe with every one of my videos. With the meat completely browned, it's ready to pull off. I'm going to put this onto a plate with a couple paper towels to drain off any excess grease. However, I don't want to pour out any of the excess grease that's still in the pan because we're going to use that to fry up our onion. In fact, there's not quite enough here, so I'm going to go ahead and add about another tablespoon or so of olive oil just to make sure we have enough fat to saute up the rest of our ingredients. Our onion's going to go in first, and we're going to saute this for about 3 or 4 minutes, stirring it regularly. This takes the longest amount of time, so you want to start off with this. Once the onion looks a little bit translucent and has softened up a bit, you know it's ready. The garlic goes in, and we're going to saute this for only about 30 to 60 seconds. Once it smells nice and fragrant like garlic, you know you're ready. For an extra punch of tomato flavor, I'm going to put in some tomato paste. You do want to cook this, sauteing it for about a minute or so, and that's going to cook out any raw tomato flavor and really help mellow it out a bit. With our ingredients nicely browned, we know it's time to add in our tomatoes. I'll be using half fresh tomatoes and half canned tomatoes today, simply to show you that it doesn't really matter which kind you use, they both work great. Remember that canned tomatoes are a fantastic option. They're a lot quicker and a lot easier to use, and there's no shame whatsoever. Just remember, though, that if you're using canned tomatoes, you're going to need to use two full cans. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I actually think canned tomatoes are one of those products that's actually a bit superior than fresh, but use what you have and what you like. I just want to give you options so that everybody can make all of these dishes no matter what the situation. If you skip the step of breaking them down with your hand or are using only canned tomatoes, we do want to break them down here a little bit in the pan. You can use a large spoon or a potato masher like I'm doing. You're going to cook them over this medium-high heat, allowing it to reduce down for about 10 minutes. After 10 minutes of cooking, my sauce has reduced down and looks like this. This is great. This is exactly what I want to see. Add your meat back into the tomato sauce and give everything a nice stir until it's well mixed. You can go ahead and turn off the heat. Your sauce is done. This actually reminds me I should make an episode on how to do sloppy joes, but that's for another day. The thickness that you're looking for is something like this. You definitely don't want it to be too watery or runny. I love fresh herbs, so I'm going to use some fresh basil. However, don't worry if you don't have it. You can certainly use some dried in place. We're going to go ahead and pluck off the leaves just like this, and we're going to stack them together into a little booklet. We're going to use a technique called chiffonade, which is just a very fancy term for cutting these into little ribbons. This is accomplished by stacking all the leaves together, rolling it into a little tube, and then slicing it with your knife. It works out a little easier than just trying to stack them or do this individually. What you're left with is something that's going to look like this. You should have nice thin ribbons that look beautiful. Next, we're going to build our cheese sauce, and we're going to begin with some ricotta cheese. I couldn't find ricotta, but I did find this cottage cheese here. It's northern Thailand, and not everything's available to me. However, this makes a great substitution for ricotta. Additionally, it's actually a little bit healthier, so if you're looking for a low-calorie option, this is great. Bouncing around from country to country, living as a digital nomad for the past few years, I've had to make tons of substitutions, and it just goes to show you if there's a will, there's a way. A little dried oregano goes in. You could also use some dried rosemary or an Italian seasoning blend. In goes our beautiful ribbons of basil, followed by some Parmesan cheese. Of course, if you have a brick that you can grate this fresh, it is absolutely going to be better than pre-grated, but this is what I have on hand because my options are very limited. To bind everything together and make sure it doesn't run out after we bake it, we're going to crack in one whole egg and then blend it very well. This looks good. Let's move on to the zucchini. The sliced and salted zucchini has been sitting here for about 20 or 30 minutes as we prepped up the rest of the ingredients, and as you can see, quite a bit of moisture is pulled out to the top here, as well as the paper towel below. We want to go ahead and wick this away. Just take a clean paper towel and wipe it off. You want to make sure to get the salt off as well. Flip it over. Again, you want to make sure to clean off all that salt from that surface so the overall dish isn't too salty when you finish. This is a very critical step to eliminate some water in the zucchini. That way, once we bake the lasagna, you don't end up with a watery mess in the bottom because nobody wants that. I like to transfer my dried pieces of zucchini to a clean paper towel just to keep them ready when I assemble. Using my finest disposable aluminum pan from the hardware store, I'm going to begin by lubing it up with a little bit of olive oil. This will help prevent anything from sticking to the edges. Just pour a little bit in, and I like to use a paper towel to spread it out into a nice even layer, and definitely don't forget the sides. Assembly is going to begin with 1/3 of our tomato sauce placed directly into the bottom. You want to make sure that this is a nice even layer across the entire surface. That way nothing sticks and it creates a nice base for us to build upon. The second layer is going to be zucchini. You want to place the strips down and make sure that they're touching edge to edge, but try not to overlap them at all, otherwise it's going to be a little bit too thick. Coming to the end here, there was a bit of a gap that ran along this edge right here. So I need to create a small piece. This really isn't a problem. We're just going to go ahead and cut a piece to fit. And we want to make sure to cut a little piece to fit into that corner right there. Don't worry, nobody will see it. Layer three is going to be 1/2 of our cheese mixture. I like to spoon this over evenly on the surface and then use the back of the spoon to spread it out. Again, you want to make sure every layer is completely full coverage and it's nice and smooth. Next, 1/3 of our tomato sauce goes on. Once again, we're going to go ahead and spread this into a nice, even thin layer. Put 1/2 of our mozzarella cheese on top. If you can grate this from fresh, of course, it's going to be a little bit better than the pre-grated stuff, but this is what I have available. Don't let anything hold you back. Our second layer of zucchini goes on. Nice edge to edge coverage. Again, cut the pieces to fit if necessary. The other half of our cheese sauce is going to go on top, followed by the last third of our tomato sauce. That way it doesn't dry out while baking. And we're going to finish this off with the other half of our mozzarella cheese. We're going to brown this up a little bit later, and it's going to create a wonderful top to our lasagna. Here's a little trick you can use. You're going to take 4 toothpicks, and we're going to put them into each corner of our lasagna. When we wrap this in aluminum foil, this is going to prevent it from falling down into the cheese and getting stuck and pulling all of our cheese off the top. Take your time to wrap your lasagna very well and crimp the edges around your baking pan to keep all of that moisture in as you bake it. I like to transfer this all to a completely covered baking sheet. That way, if anything drips off, we don't have a huge mess. We're going to place this into the center of a 375-degree oven that we've preheated and cook it covered for about 35 to 45 minutes. I let my lasagna bake for about 45 minutes because I have a small oven. We're going to go ahead and pull it out and remove the aluminum foil completely. Now, our lasagna is not quite done yet. We need to make sure to remove the toothpicks here before we complete the final step of cooking. We're going to place this back into the oven at 375, uncovered, and allow the cheese to brown. This is going to take about 8 to 15 minutes. After about 11 minutes, I pulled my lasagna from the oven because I thought it looked fantastic. The cheese is nice and golden, everything was well cooked through, and it's done. Make sure to let this sit at room temperature for a good 10 to 15 minutes to allow everything to cool slightly. It'll hold up a lot better when you cut it. Before cutting, I like to run my knife around the edge just to make sure nothing is stuck to the pan. I recommend using a serrated knife when cutting this. It's really going to make it a lot easier and will tend to pull out the layers a lot less as you cut it. This lasagna is fantastic. It has all the flavor of a regular lasagna, but without the carbs or the gluten. Everyone is going to enjoy this, guaranteed. And guys, it really is just that easy to make this fantastic lasagna in your kitchen tonight, 100% from scratch. And because we cooked it right, no watery lasagna on the plate. Thank you so much for watching until the end. I appreciate it so much. I'll catch each of you next week on the next episode of Minimalist Gourmet.